The best version of Minecraft is probably one of the most heavily debated topics in the community. Everyone's favorite update is completely subjective, and really, we all have a fair say in the discussion. However, as a YouTuber, my statements are total objective facts, which means if you disagree with me, you're wrong. Since I have such a privilege, I feel compelled to make a video about the greatest version of Minecraft. This was one of the most heavily anticipated and requested patches, yet despite all of the excitement and even rarely seen community support, Mojang made some very unfortunate mistakes that has seemingly doomed this version into relative obscurity. In today's video, we're going to be discussing it, and I'll explain why it's so good despite a few glaring issues caused from the shaky development, a derailed hype train, as well as some really poor decisions. With all of that said, be sure to tell me about your own favorite versions in the comment section, and let's take a look at the Caves and Cliffs update. Whenever looking at the Caves and Cliffs update as a whole, it can be difficult to pinpoint the exact versions included. Of course, there's the two official parts, 1.17 and 1.18, but many features promised with the original announcement were pushed back or shelved, such as the Deep Dark that released in a later version, or the Bundle and Archaeology, which we've yet to really hear any news on. So with that said, I'm going to be focusing primarily on 1.18 in this video, as I've yet to get around to going through the other things in its entirety, and I feel like it's really become its own identity separate from this topic. Now, what's so great about this version that I consider it to be the best update to the game? Well, I have two different perspectives, and in order to keep that average view duration up, I'll start with perhaps the more grandiose aspects, because deep down our monkey brains go ooh ooh ah ah when looking at these epic cinematic montages using shaders. The main focus of the Caves and Cliffs update is pretty self-explanatory. Caves were revamped for the first time since release, and the way they generate is pretty interesting. There's tons of different variants involved, but at a macro level, there are two types of caves: cheese and spaghetti. Cheese caverns consist of air pockets similar to what you would see in certain types of your favorite dairy product, hence the name. They range from these massive, stunning megastructures that cover thousands of blocks, to much smaller circular voids that are more akin to a room. Then there's spaghetti caves. This is closer to what we think of when talking about the subject. It can range from thin, claustrophobic noodles to almost terrifyingly massive tunnels that stretch out for hundreds of blocks. These two features work together to create a truly stunning underworld, without even factoring in all the extra structures and biomes. Now, I could do the same thing I just did and go over all the new types of mountains, but you know what? I think that the changes made in the overworld are far greater than the underworld. Certain aspects about Minecraft has changed permanently, and I absolutely adore them. When developing this update, Mojang ran into an evident problem. The new mountains shot out into the sky as if they were one of those old monoliths. I couldn't find any snapshots from early development versions, but it must have been uncanny enough to warrant them to completely change how the entire seed generates. If you've played in 1.18 chunks yet, I'm sure you've likely noticed the difference. Rivers may now be significantly larger. Hills and biome variants seem a lot more diverse. Shorelines are often radically different to their 1.17 counterparts. Sometimes there just isn't any smooth transition from land to sea at all, and you get these really awesome looking cliffs that can scale up to 100 blocks. Some of you watching may be wondering what the devs changed that turned this into that. Well, it may be surprising, but the vast majority of this is because of one single reason. In order to fully understand it, my older viewers will be pleased to hear that a brief history lesson is in store. Ever since the beginning, there have been several dramatic shifts in world generation. The changes before alpha don't really matter for this video, but there are 4 updates in particular that stand out. Release 1.7, the update that changed the world, Beta 1.8, the first part of the adventure update, and Alpha 1.2, the Halloween update. You can probably guess when this version of Alpha came out, and while being known for adding the Nether, it also implemented proper biomes for the first time. The way they worked is complicated, and all that really matters is that this defined the first widespread generation of Minecraft players. And then almost a year later, Mojang fundamentally altered these worlds to be almost unrecognizable. The height map that dictated how far above or below the surface was from sea level was locked to individual biomes. This meant that they all exist around Y70. In some ways, this was great. A standardized and flatter world meant that more of the land is easily built on. Then there's the fact that you don't really have to worry about getting a terrible world. Back in Alpha, your spawn area would be a gamble between either being absolutely stunning or just straight up ugly. However, I feel like with the adventure update, all this means is that everything was simply mediocre. Luckily with release 1.7.2, we got some desperately needed variety. A ton of new biomes got added, but also variations of existing ones too. You're sure to have seen the classic forested hills or desert mountains, but in my opinion, all this really did was put a band-aid on a problem that would last for nearly 8 years after this patch. The problem being that the world generation is simply boring. If you ever wanted to waste an hour of your life, load up like 10 worlds in 1.16 and explore around. They're all practically the same. What's the point of having a quintillion different seeds that each have the surface area similar to that of Neptune if each one ultimately just looks like this? Alright, I'm getting a bit heated on this topic. You can probably tell that I'm not a huge fan of the direction Mojang took after the release, and I'm sure many other longtime players would agree, or at least understand the sentiment. So what's the one thing that 1.18 changes that improves all this? Well, I alluded to it earlier. That height map that was bound to biomes, well, it was unlocked and free to dictate how terrain generated, similar to how it did in alpha. Perhaps I'm overstating the importance of this change, but really, out of all the new amazing features the Caves and Cliffs update added, the new overworld generation has single-handedly reinvigorated my interest for the game in a way that I haven't really felt since 2012. However, we still have a lot to cover in this video, and ultimately Mojang only made this change so that mountains formed in aesthetically appealing ways. Before this update, Minecraft never really had genuine mountains. It was either hills or whatever the hell this is. And to avoid the issues that cause the quite literal uncanny valley, the way mountains form in the game is quite interesting and unique. They are essentially height-dependent biomes, sort of the inverse of what we talked about earlier. Imagine a two-dimensional Minecraft world. To the left of you is a completely flat ocean, and to the right are plains and forests. As you travel eastward, the terrain begins rising slowly at first, but eventually you reach the meadow, 20 meters above the sea level. Continuing on, it becomes colder and snow covers the ground, going through the groves, and eventually snowy slopes. Before you know it, you're on a jagged peak looking across the world, hundreds of blocks from where you started. This is a complicated and difficult thing to do in a procedurally generated world, but I do feel like Mojang really handled it well. And this process of slowly making your way up through several different biomes is so much more satisfying to me than just finding a 90-degree angle cliffside going to the top of the world. I have a question for you. Perhaps I'm only using it as a segue to the next segment of this video, but in say 5 years from now, when looking back on the current state of Minecraft, will you remember the in-game world from a bird's eye view? You won't be thinking about the technical requirements for how terrain is formed. Instead, you will remember all of your actual experiences playing the game, in survival or creative. That's why I think it would be prudent to go over why this update is awesome. Not just on the macroscopic scale, but from the player's own point of view. Now, while this version did not fundamentally change all of the core Minecraft experiences, it dramatically altered one in particular: the adventure. By the way, I'd like to take a short aside to ask those of you still watching to leave a like on the video and comment if there's something on your mind. It may not seem like a big deal, but it really does help the video reach so many more people. Anyways, I know these CTAs are annoying, so thanks for bearing through it. Looking back at the adventure update that officially launched the full release of the game, people didn't know it back then, but I really feel like despite the name, this was the death of adventuring in Minecraft. After a while, there just wasn't any point of going out to explore. Once you saw each biome, you effectively have seen every imaginable combination of seed. The same applied to spelunking. Players got bored of going through the same caves over and over again, eventually resorting to branch mining in order to be as efficient as possible. 1.18 in particular completely changed this, and just like in the last section, it would be best to explore underground, and then resurface to talk about the overworld. The way we now go about exploring the endless, sprawling systems of caverns has been dramatically altered. When starting a new world or trekking through fresh terrain, there's multiple ways to find an entrance. Previously, the only openings were small spaghetti strands with a low possibility of finding a larger network, as well as giant cracks in the surface called canyons. This new update adds significantly more variety. There's these carvers that kind of resemble sheets. To me, they're extremely claustrophobic and very terrifying to go through. Then there's the regular caves that we all know and love, and rarely, every now and then, you'll find the mother of all entrances, these absolutely massive openings that are just begging you to jump down and explore. While actually playing in survival mode, the one word that I would use to describe spelunking in modern Minecraft is dread. Thanks to noise caves, generation is significantly more random, and subsequently, far more dangerous. There are almost constant forks and branches leading elsewhere in all 3 dimensions. This means that much more of the underworld now exists with air pockets leading to mob spawning being spread thin. You would think that this makes things easier, but for me, all this means is that your quest for ores and gems is turned into a survival war, where a creeper could be hiding in practically any crevice. I hope you have good reflexes, because if and when a creeper jumps down onto you, even with full iron armor, it can instantly kill you in hard mode. Oh, and just so you know, prepare to get lost. Trying to find your way back is pretty helpless, so just be sure to stock up on food, torches, and crafting material, because you will probably end up at least several hundred meters away from your base, if not further. However, if you want diamonds, you have to go much deeper than earlier versions. Where there used to be bedrock is now a mysterious stone known as deep slate. While this place is quite dangerous, it is full of potential riches and interesting things to find. I am really glad that Mojang changed the stone type below Y0, as it puts into perspective just how far below you are. The world has always felt very shallow. Even at bedrock, you were only about 60 meters deep, or about 30 steves. Now, it ranges from at least twice that to well over 300 meters underground. So whenever you're exploring a massive cavern and you can't even see the normal stone on the ceiling, it really does put things into perspective. This change in depth also means a change in ore distribution. Previously, very little thought was put into where ores go, probably because of how long it went without any updates. There's no longer a single perfect Y level to branch mine at. Now of course redstone and diamonds are found near bedrock, but gold is most common at -16, while +16 for iron, and I found that coal is actually best mined high up. Because of the fact that mountains are packed with coal, iron, and emeralds, they have far more functionality other than simply looking cool. Then there's copper. I really hope that copper has far more uses in the future, because right now it is by far the most common ore type while being almost completely useless. But now that you've gotten plenty of materials, we're finally ready to explore the world. One of the most noticeable differences is that biomes are quite a bit larger. Even whenever you use higher render distance, things seem so much more vast, and I quite like it this way. When the first experimental snapshots came out, I was worried that it would make getting from certain places much more difficult. However, I found the opposite to be true. I love walking across the new and interesting terrain so much that I've refused to use elytras going forward. Instead, I've been focusing on building pathways and roads opposed to spam clicking fireworks while in the sky. However, while traveling through undeveloped land, there's a special type of armor that is a must-have, all thanks to a feature that I had originally completely disregarded as a gimmick. Back in 2019, during the biome vote where mountains were chosen to be updated, Mojang mentioned snowier snow, and it was revealed to be patches of powdered snow that can be found in new cold biomes. Somehow, they managed to make this one of my favorite features, simply because it's a humbling mechanic. On my survival world, I particularly remember lighting up the crater edges of my base, before accidentally falling into the stuff and then being dropped down into a cave full of mobs. Thankfully I survived, but it was a reminder that I wasn't safe. Mother Nature always has the last laugh. Yet the best part is that this feature doesn't exist purely as a nuisance. If you have leather boots on, you will be able to walk over it without issue. While climbing mountains, this can actually be pretty useful, as it acts almost like scaffolding that you can easily go up. Now, did I just make you listen to me talk about snow for 60 seconds? Yes, I did. But all I'm saying is, Mojang, please add quicksand to deserts. Okay, I should transition away from this topic before I get demonetized for talking about white powder. So I'll mention that not all biomes are created equal. I feel like plains have suffered visually, and it has become evident that they were never intended to have an incline of more than 1 or 2 blocks. This makes sense considering it's called the plains biome, but I really feel like some sort of change needs to occur. Maybe cobbled rocks on slopes, and different grass variations. Although I have a feeling that Mojang noticed this since plains seem to be significantly rare and smaller than their surroundings. Other than that, I don't really have any problems with biomes as a whole, except for the fact that you're no longer guaranteed a perfectly average world. I'm reminded of the old days again, where results can be quite mixed. There's now a much greater chance that the spawn point will be ugly or uninteresting, so you may need to walk off in a direction or change seeds. But it's really not that bad. I spent maybe an hour or two to find my current survival world seed and have enjoyed the look of everything far more than any previous ones. Hopefully I have made it pretty clear just how much I enjoy this update. Sadly, I really feel like it's quite underrated with how major some of these changes are. When looking at Google Trends, you'll notice that 1.18 really didn't drum up much interest. In fact, more people were interested in 1.19, despite the only unique addition being a worse version of the swamp. Why did players seemingly move on so quickly afterwards? Well, it's likely due to the sheer amount of anticipation the devs drummed up for this version. For several years before the announcement in 2020, players had already been demanding it for years. And then when Mojang finally went into detail, they promised so many massive changes that blew us away. Looking back on it now, they likely bit off way more than they could chew. And we should have seen it coming when about 4 or 5 months later, Mojang would announce that they would be splitting the update. 1.17 would get all of the blocks, mobs, ores, etc. And 1.18 would actually implement the new world features into a usable format. This was far from ideal, and I believe separating caves and cliffs killed a lot of the hype and momentum that was building up for well over 3 years by that point. The best solution would have been to postpone the entire update until late 2021 or 2022, and make 1.17 similar to the Buzzy Bees patch. However, by the time Mojang realized their mistake, it was likely far too late. So all that we can really hope for is that moving onward, they'll have learned to not overpromise. The Caves and Cliffs update is a story of a bridge too far. Yet, despite the mishap, I think that what did eventually come will greatly help future versions in implementing greater and grander additions. So I really hope that in 5 years, people look back on this patch as one of the greatest of all time. What do you think about all of this? Be sure to tell me in the comments. A huge thanks goes to my patrons, Stars, Caucasian Crustacean, Split, Autumn, Trash Never Dies, MKJ, CF23, and Quebec. If you would like ad-free videos a day early, you can support me on Patreon or with YouTube memberships for just $5 a month. You can give more if you would like, but all perks are the same. Remember to check out my other videos, Why is Minecraft So Terrifying? And The Marketplace Isn't That Bad. Other than that, remember to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so that you will be notified when the next video releases.